Welcome to this short tutorial on Nebraska ESU Cooperative Purchasing's Easy Purchase website. Today's tutorial is based around workflows. Workflows are the approval processes that we can place within our instance that will drive our approval process. Please remember we must have at least one workflow present to make sure that orders are approved, as no order can go through the system without approval. To get started, we're going to go to the Menu tab and select the Admin key. We go over to the Select Function box and go to Workflow Settings. We're going to start here with Workflow Criteria. Workflow criteria are the items within an order that can drive our approval process, or identifiers. There are three that I like to use within this process. One is Ship to Attention. Ship to Attention is the party that's requesting the order, so we could build an approval process around the parties requesting orders, so we can maybe make a group like a department that needs to be approved by a certain group of party or people within our organization. I also like Ship to Location. Ship to Location would be the locations that you've built using your Add Edit Location feature. Once those have been built, you can use those locations to differentiate different approval processes. Thus, you could have an approval process for your high school that's separate from your middle schools, and so on. I also like the criteria of transaction total. If you're looking for a very easy workflow that's all-encompassing, we're going to show you one based around transaction totals today. But transaction total, you can differentiate approval process based around a dollar amount of spend. So if you were to spend $500, you could have one workflow that was different than one that was all-encompassing, catching anything under $500. To add anything to our assigned workflow criteria, we just select the item and then assign. If we want to remove it from our workflow criteria field, we just unassign it like that. Now that we have a group of assigned workflow, we can now choose from these criteria later as we're building our workflow. So make sure that you've assigned the criteria that you'd like to drive your workflow around, and it appears in this field before we move on to the next step. Once I have the criteria within the assigned workflow criteria field, I can go to my workflow settings again, and now I go to Add Edit Workflow. First, we have to give our workflow a name. I'm going to give this one a name of Basic. This is one that you can find in the training environment as well, and we've used during our trainings. Once I hit the Go tab, it's going to populate that field. For today's training, I'll clear out these fields. The name that we've given our workflow, it will automatically populate here in the workflow name box. Workflow priority is the events in which your workflows will take place. So if you have a workflow with a priority of 1 and multiple criteria are met, it would take place before a workflow of 2. So essentially the priority field is just telling the system what order you want your approval process to take place if you have multiple workflows and multiple criteria are met. So a workflow with a priority of 1 would take place before a workflow with a priority of 2, and so on. To go on, I'm going to define the criteria that's going to drive my approval process. To start, I click the green box and it populates this field. If I click on this tab over here, you'll see the criteria that we had designated earlier appears. I'm going to build this workflow around transaction total, which would be a dollar amount. Then I'll go to the greater than or equal to sign and select 0. So now I have a workflow or an approval process that is going to be designed around a process of which anytime a transaction total is greater than or equal to 0, then it will drive an approval process that I designate below here. Currently, I have myself in this field. If I liked this workflow, I could go ahead and, as opposed to this Update tab, I would see a green Add tab, and then I could click that, and now this workflow would be in place inside my instance. However, I can also do a couple of contingencies here to add additional parties to my approval process. If I wanted multiple parties to approve, I can select them, and now we know that both myself and Brenda must approve. The parties that will appear in this box are parties that you've given the approver privilege to in the Add Edit User function. So I could build this out to essentially ask that 3 parties are going to approve. This isn't really stipulating any specific order, but what it is telling me that Kip and Brenda and Bill must approve. So if we read our workflow like we would read a book from left to right, it all makes a little more sense. Transaction total that's greater than or equal to 0 will be approved by Kip and Brenda and Bill. You can also stipulate the order of events that these approval processes will take place. This is a nice function that I like because you can designate who's going to approve the order and in what sequence they're going to do that. So in this case, anytime the transaction total is greater than or equal to 0, Kip will approve, next Brenda. The reason I do this is that I'm going to give you a hypothetical. Say that Kip is the principal and Brenda is the business manager. Well, the principal may be able to say whether or not a faculty member can have a certain amount of items, or maybe they're going to decide whether or not a faculty member can have what they're asking for. And then Brenda, we'll call her our business manager. She can go through and encumber funds and apply a purchase order number to that order and do whatever she needs to do financially to make that purchase order match our typical business practices at our school. The reason that I put myself, the principal, before Brenda, the business manager, is that if I had Brenda before me, then Brenda might go ahead and apply a PO number, encumber funds, and then when it gets to me, the principal, I might say that I don't like that order, I want to change some things within it. Well, then Brenda would actually have to go back through and reconcile that purchase order number and then unencumber the funds, which might be a lengthy process. So it's just something to think about as you're designing your workflow, the order of which you want people to approve. We could also do a broadscaping one that would just allow myself or Brenda to approve. So you could designate multiple parties with this OR tab, and any one of them could approve at any time. The basic function is always within this workflow settings in the training environment. You should have login credentials, but if you don't have those, contact any one of us at Co-op and let us know, and we'll make sure we get you some so you can look through these workflows if any one of these workflows looks like it would be applicable for you. Once I'm done, if I'm building this for the first time, this button would say Add, but I'm going to go ahead and update because I can also edit my workflows based on any changes that I want to make going forward. Now I'm going to build a workflow that's based around multiple buildings. So maybe you want one approval process for your high school, one for your middle school, and one for your elementary. I'm going to show you how you can do that. So I'm going to type in high school building, school A. This is just a title that I can identify my workflow by. The system says that there is no workflow like this. Again, I'll give it a priority number. And now, in this field, where before we did transaction total, we're going to do ship to location, because we're going to build a workflow for every building that we have within our instance to differentiate a different approval process. So this one we would say ship to location contains the reason that I'm using high with the word contains is that the workflow or the approval process will be triggered by this word. If I used any word like school or anything like, in this case, A, which would be my school name, then that would actually catch that item and then drive the approval process. So it would have to go through multiple workflows. And that seems to be what we don't want to do in this case because we want a workflow that's designated by building. So I want to make sure that it matches. Or I can do equals and then put in the actual school building name there. So then you know exactly what it's going to trigger because it's based on the actual school's name. But make sure that this name actually matches the exact name that you have in your add edit location field. If it's off even a little bit, it won't match because this field is stating that it must equal this. Once I've gone through and designated that, I can go ahead and create the approval process that I would like to have in place. So I could again do next or and or and add as many parties as I would like. Also, if I had a couple of buildings or a couple locations that I wanted to have within the same workflow because my approvers would be the same for both, I could add another field, do another ship to location equals, and maybe this time it would be middle school. So maybe my high school and my middle school have the same approval process, or the same approvers that are going to be approving those orders. So I can add multiple layers within this if I'm going to have the same approvers approving this workflow. However, if I'm going to do multiple layers here, I must change this function to OR. Before, when it said AND, it was saying that that must be met. If this were to be AND right now, the ship to location would not equal both of these locations that I've built out here because there's only one ship to location on an order. So we must use the OR function so it will look for either one of these. So now we know anytime the ship to location equals high school building or middle school building, KIP will approve. Another workflow we can design is based around the ship to parties. I've designed a workflow that's called departmental in here. And what this workflow does is it allows us to group faculty members together in one approval process. So if we look at this workflow, it's been built out to say anytime that the ship to attention contains the name Robert De Niro, Saul Hudson, or Winnie the Pooh, Kip and Brenda will approve. We could go on and add additional parties. And we can add as many parties as we want. So this has been our tutorial on how to add and edit workflows. Should you have any questions through this process or about any of the offerings of Nebraska ESU Cooperative Purchasing, feel free to call myself, Kip Schneider, at 402-261-9405 or co-op staff at 402-387-1245. Brenda's at extension 101 and Priscilla's at extension 102. Any one of us would be glad to help you. And again, we thank you all so much for your participation within the ESU Cooperative Purchasing process. Have a great day.